How's it going guys, Chris here, bringing you another guide for Star Wars Jedi Survivor. This time we're going to be checking out all those weird and wacky creature enemies that roam the planets you visit, which are often going to be hostile towards you while exploring and venturing around. One of the first creature enemy types you'll come across on the planet of Kobo is a sneaky critter called the Shiverpede, a big bug-like creature that blends into its environment only to pounce on unsuspecting prey as it wanders on by. Known by the locals as springers, Shiverpedes will often use the element of surprise to get the drop on you, waiting until you get closer, striking at the opportune moment with their razor-sharp claws and fang-like teeth, revealing the creature in its uncamouflaged form for you to then whack around with your lightsaber in close range, and get a bit of revenge for jump scaring you. Although these crafty buggers mainly rely on that initial leaping strike to do most of the damage, Shiverpedes will still attack you afterwards with those slicing claws and tail whips. It's generally best to try and spot them hiding before they jump on you, often done by listening out for the sounds they make, looking out for suspicious mounds of dirt, and just by treading carefully in areas where there's a lot of them around. Not always the easiest thing to do, especially when they're lying around in the shadows or hidden away in dark caves. But so long as you're not dashing around like a headless chicken in Shiverpede dense locations, you should be able to pass through in one piece without getting turned into bug food. Another pretty common Kobo creature is the Gorger, basically lizard dogs, which tend to hang around in packs. These guys like to overwhelm their prey in numbers, often taking turns to pounce on their targets while flanking around the back and sides to try and strike from unexpected angles. They'll often try to use speed and agility to their advantage, diving in with those sharp claws and gobs full of spiny teeth. But only when they think it's a good idea to do so, cautiously waiting for a decent moment rather than going wild and being stupidly aggressive. You're going to have to keep switching from target to target, keeping an eye on all the Gorgers in the pack in case one of them decides to do a sneaky and attack you from outside of your view. That lightsaber of yours should do a pretty fine job of slicing them in half, should they get a bit too close for comfort. Plus you could always use force abilities too if you need to prevent them from moving around so much. With Gorgers being defenseless, ranged attacks like lightsaber throws and blaster shots can also be a good way to deal damage over distance and whittle down their numbers, making it easier for you to take on the rest of the group. They're fairly weak enemies on their own, heavily depending on each other to bring down their targets. The Gorocco is one of the tougher creatures you'll find on Kobo, a huge beast that jumps around like a cracked out gorilla, using both power and speed to take down its opponents. Having arms like tree trunks, Goroccos are going to spend most of their time trying to smash you into the ground using a variety of hard-hitting slams and unblockable strikes, throwing in the occasional headbutt and drop kick too for good measure. They're pretty fast for their size, jumping in and out of the fight to both deal and avoid taking damage, often making them risky enemies to be up against, being able to recover quite quickly from your attacks too. This means you've got to be on high alert, picking the right times to strike, while staying vigilant for the Gorocco to come charging back at you at any moment. So it's probably going to be a good idea to limit those lightsaber combos with the creature still able to attack you in the middle of a chain. If getting pummeled into the dirt isn't enough, you've also got to watch out for it lobbing rocks and debris at you over distance, something else you're going to have to try and avoid getting hit by. Goroccos might seem to have a lot of the best attributes, being fast and powerful with a variety of different attacks under its belt, but most of those attacks can be blocked at least. And providing you can keep whittling down that health in between their own strikes, you should be able to take them out without too many problems. Probably the deadliest tumbleweed you'll ever encounter, the Bramlik is essentially Spiky Pac-Man, a big ball of thorns which rolls around, stabbing anything it comes into contact with. It might not look like it, but these things are actually living creatures, with those spines acting as a defense mechanism against anything that might want to come along and turn it into a snack. Bramliks have got jaws full of small teeth, hidden amongst their spiny bodies, which can also be used as a last resort weapon to chomp down on its prey, even you if you hold it into the air for too long with the force. They're mainly going to try and fend you off with those spikes instead, making them deadlier enemies in close ranges, where you might want to attack them using your lightsaber. So ranged attacks like blaster shots, lightsaber throws and force abilities are all typically going to be safer ways to get rid of these guys without getting prickled. They're not particularly tough creatures that are going to do a lot of harm, but they can still block off paths and make areas awkward to pass through. So although you can just avoid Bramliks and treat them like deadly environmental props, they can still be easily fruit ninja'd with that lightsaber, if they're getting in the way and need to be dispatched. What would you get if you crossed a hammerhead shark with a dodo? Well, you'd probably get this thing, a very angry bird-like creature called the Rawka, found scampering around on the planet of Kobo. Rawkas are basically deadly alien chickens which are highly territorial, and really don't want you getting near them. They'll attack with fierce beak pecks and charges, rushing in mindlessly to try and headbutt you, and do whatever it can to deal some damage, usually without thinking about the consequences first. They're definitely aggressive creatures, but they're not exactly very smart, eagerly attempting to take you on in a fight, despite the fact that they can literally be sliced in half with just 1 or 2 flicks of that lightsaber. Having that bird brain makes them more susceptible to mind tricks too, and with them using fairly predictable attacks, darting straight at you head first, most of those strikes can be easy to dodge and block, leaving them very vulnerable in between. You will need to keep an eye out for those unblockable charges, with Rawkas able to cover ground quite quickly, and if you're taking on a few at once, then those offensive tactics can sometimes work in their favour, rushing at you unexpectedly while you're distracted by another. One of the largest creatures you'll need to take on in Jedi Survivor is the Bilemaw, a big bulky beast covered in plates of tough armour. These guys are sort of like huge orange pigs with lots of sharp tusks, also found on Kobo, living amongst the caves and rocky crevices. You can expect to get hit by a lot of charge attacks, just like the Rawka, but unlike the Rawka, this thing is the size of a bloody truck, making those bashes and slams a hell of a lot heavier and trickier to dodge. Because of that thick hide and armour plating, the Bilemaw is going to be more resistant to your attacks, especially when you're taking it on face to face, so it can often be a wise idea to try and flank the creature whenever you can, slashing away at its sides and slapping its arse with that lightsaber, dealing a tad more damage on its tender spots, with it having less protection there. Just keep in mind that the Bilemaw can attack you from pretty much all angles, choosing to use you as a seat if you're standing behind it, and even barrel roll in itself to smush you into the floor if you're striking from the sides. It also has a tendency to spit bile at you too in close ranges, sweeping the area with a stream of nasty looking liquid, and oddly enough, it can also spit out Bramliks too, which can be thrown back, though would otherwise add extra peril to the fight if they're not dealt with. Remember the Wampa from Empire Strikes Back? Well, the next creature is sort of like an interplanetary relative, only this one's adapted to the climate on Kobo instead. The beast in question is the Mogu, basically the Star Wars equivalent to Bigfoot, a very aggressive mammal with super strength, razor-sharp claws, and lots of hair. This thick fur acts as camouflage in the Kobo forests, allowing the Mogu to stalk its prey before pouncing on it, though thankfully for you, they prefer not to use stealth against you in the game, choosing to just run over and try to batter you senseless instead, with those fast lunges, grabs and slams. Some of these attacks are unblockable of course, and will therefore need to be dodged, and the slams are going to kick up loads of dust and debris from the floor, damaging you if you don't jump over it. Because the Mogu won't get interrupted by your strikes, it's best to time your attacks in between its own, during moments where it's vulnerable and less likely to smack you around. In some cases, you can go all Luke Skywalker and chop off their arms during the fight. But despite having one less limb to whack you around with, that's still not going to stop the Mogu from coming after you. And if anything, it's probably just going to wind it up even more. As soon as you land on Jeddah, it won't be long until you're met by Hardshells, one of the smallest creatures in the game, which, considering they're crab-like creatures, still aren't really all that small. If the name doesn't give it away, these little critters can develop tough outer shells, protecting them from sandstorms in the desert, also acting as a defense mechanism against predators. Though you'll probably notice that not all of these creatures have developed these shells. In fact, most of them don't, so they're going to be easy pickings for your lightsaber attacks, which is why they often gather together, having more strength in numbers. Considering how puny and weak they are, they're still very persistent, chasing you down relentlessly despite all of the odds pretty much being against them. The ones that do have those hard shells are generally a bit more resistant to your attacks, and they're also going to use a few sneaky tricks to try and catch you out, by digging underground, only to resurface and strike from underneath, while often doing a kamikaze maneuver, causing that shell to self-destruct after taking damage, blowing themselves up in an attempt to try and take you down with them. Hard shells are also known to spit at you from over range too, so despite just being basic crab-like creatures with shells, they've actually got a fair few tricks up their sleeves, other than just those little pincers. A much bigger, nastier creature you'll also find lurking around under the sands of Jeddah's surface is a gigantic bug-like monster called the Skriton, one of Jeddah's deadliest lifeforms due to its ability to prey on its targets and strike from underground. Resembling a huge scorpion with lopsided claws, pronged tail spikes and a very evil grin, you can see why these guys are considered to be one of the moon's most hostile creatures, attacking you with all of those malicious weapons, trying to stab and crush you to death with close-range melee strikes. Although its right claw looks like it's shrunken a bit in the wash, the left one is a hell of a lot bigger with much more power and damage resistance, so it's going to use this one to guard its face while lashing out with heavy pincer attacks, a little bit like a boxer, both protecting themselves and jabbing away at their target with their glove. Because you're mainly going to be keeping an eye on that big claw, with that being the Skriton's primary weapon, it's generally best to flank around the creature's right side, so your left side, and hack away at it from that angle instead, where the Skriton's going to be most vulnerable. A lot of your ranged attacks can be blocked off, but so long as you keep attacking the creature's weaker side with quick lightsaber combos, you should be able to take it down without too much hassle. One of the most bizarre looking creatures found on Jedi, the Sutaban sorta looks like a giant mutant slug that somehow managed to grow limbs and hit the gym. It's another ferocious beast with hyper-aggressive tendencies, eager to lash out at pretty much anyone daring enough to come near it. They stalk around the ruins of Jedi's ancient temples, keeping an eye out for a good meal. And because they'll attack you on sight, you're gonna have to react quickly when they spot you, being pretty wild, rampaging creatures which use a lot of quick melee strikes and flurries, also leaping around the place to try and hit you over distance, something you'll need to dive out of the way of. The Sutaban's attack patterns can be a bit brash and clumsy, and they're often prone to getting a bit carried away, swinging those arms around, leading to them falling over, making them disoriented, thus giving you some nice opportunities to strike in between those melee combos. You'll need to do a lot of dodging and blocking, giving your reaction times a bit of a test, but the Sutaban is generally a fairly predictable creature, being limited to those erratic arm flurries up close. One of the most infamous creatures in the Star Wars universe, the Rancor makes its way into Star Wars Jedi Survivor, being one of the biggest, meanest enemies you'll face, able to wipe you out in the blink of an eye if you're unprepared. They can be a very dangerous threat, especially if you try and take them on too early in the game, having the potential to deal devastating damage with its heavy attacks, pretty much deleting all of your health if you get caught out by a few of those arm lunges and stomps in quick succession. Many of those attacks can't be blocked either, so they can also be quite tricky to dodge too, having a fair bit of range. Not to mention the fact that the Rancor can also turn you into a quick meal if you get grabbed, killing you instantly and ending the fight there and then. You'll have to jump over the shockwaves created by those stomping slam attacks and dive sideways to avoid getting your head knocked off by the Rancor's arm swipes, slowly chipping away at its health and taking advantage of the creature's slow movement in between attacks. It does help to be aggressive up close, but it's still best to respect the Rancor's power, flanking around its sides and rushing in to dish out the damage whenever you have an opening. Nice little tip for you, if you see a few bones lying around from the Rancor's past victims, then you can do the Luke Skywalker trick and throw these at the Rancor's mouth to jam it in there, giving you a brief opportunity to slash away while it's vulnerable. A really vicious variant of the Bilemaw can be found on Kobo, simply just called the Vile Bilemaw, which looks a bit like a beefed up version of the normal type with extra armor plating and greenish skin, basically looking a little bit like a Triceratops but without all the horns. It'll use a lot of the same sort of attacks as the others, biting, charging, rolling and generally trying to flatten you into the dirt, and you can also expect it to be accompanied by those pesky Bramliks too, with it able to spit them out at you on demand. You've got to watch out for nasty acidic liquid streams and bombs the creature likes to spew at you in close range, and get ready to jump out of the way of those unblockable charge attacks, which allows the Vile Bilemaw to cover ground quickly and hit you from across the arena. It's not an easy fight by any means, but it's not quite as tough as some of the other legendary creatures, with a lot of its attacks being quite predictable and simple to dodge. Hidden behind a big yellow gate on Kobo, you'll find the Gorocco Matriarch, one of the most unforgiving creatures in the game, which isn't really all that surprising considering how vicious the normal ones can be. With this one essentially being the head honcho, having a massive rhino-like horn, you can expect it to put up more of a fight, chaining a bunch of heavy-hitting melee combos together from slams, swipes, kicks and ground pounds, many of which are going to be unblockable. Its attacks are not only going to pack a pretty mean punch, but they're also going to come at you thick and fast, with the Gorocco Matriarch using lots of relentless strikes in continuous streams, leaving you with little time in between to strike back, forcing you to be even more careful to avoid getting pulverized by one of those flurries. You'll have to be especially vigilant to prevent getting caught out by the creature's unblockable rampage attack, which links several high damage blows together in one potentially lethal move, doing whatever the hell you can to get away from it before that combo begins. But otherwise, it can pay off to match the Matriarch's aggression, parrying the normal attacks, keeping an eye out for those slams and red attacks, while slashing away at it whenever you have a brief opening to do so. Going back over to Jedi now, where you'll be able to find the lair of another legendary beast, the Golden Skriton. Basically a tougher version of the standard one, along with it being painted gold of course. This guy's got a much more defensive fighting style than a lot of the other legendary creatures, using that huge left claw as a shield to both block off and deal damage from the front, while jabbing at you with that tail which is even more spikes than normal. Although you'll still need to advance with caution, the Golden Skriton shares a lot of its characteristics with the bog standard ones, allowing you to use the same sort of tactics to defeat it. Jump into its weaker side with the mini claw to swipe away at it there where it's got less protection. You'll need to try your best to avoid getting grabbed by that main claw, letting the Skriton stab you in the head with that tail, not fun, and you'll have to find ways to flank and attack the creature whenever its guard's down, either by parrying or sidestepping its attacks, or even using the force against it to disrupt its block, thus letting you rush in to temporarily go wild with that lightsaber. Definitely a useful thing to do against this creature specifically, with it being a bit tricky to actually deal damage to. Another legendary enemy on Jedi hidden away in the crypt of Urma is the Sutaban Alpha. To reach this beast, you'll need to do a little puzzle first and make your way through a short cave system, wandering through a small waterfall, squeezing through a crack in the wall to enter the creature's domain. Out of nowhere, the Sutaban Alpha is suddenly going to come charging at you, and although it looks very similar to the normal variant, albeit a bit more colourful, it's generally going to attack you at a quicker pace with a less forgiving nature. You'll probably be familiar with a lot of its moves, with them being the same ones the others use, but you'll have less time to react in between those moves, to both counter-attack and dodge out of the way. It can use a lot of fast sweeping flurries, ground pounds and leaping charges, sometimes throwing in unblockable attacks in the middle of their combos to spice things up a bit. So although a lot of its strikes can be parried, you'll need to watch out for the ones that can't, along with that jump attack that allows the creature to pin you down and batter you senseless with those deadly claws. So just keep at it, hacking away whenever you have an opening, and you should be able to tackle the Sutaban Alpha fine enough. Easily one of the most awkward fights you can have in Jedi Survivor is against the Mire Terror, essentially an amped up Mogu with bigger horns and a bigger attitude. Looking a bit like a buff Krampus, the Mire Terror can be found in the Viscid Bog on Kobo. It's a really powerful variant that can deal tons of damage, and what makes its encounter even trickier is the fact that it's also joined by a normal Mogu as well, giving you two strong enemies to keep an eye on at the same time. It's generally best to try and take out that basic Mogu first, with that having less health and stamina, making it a bit easier to concentrate on the big guy without being bombarded by loads of different attacks from two creatures at once. At this stage in the fight, it pays off to be cautious, keeping your distance, attacking over range, only to jump in when the two are separated, or when there's a clear opportunity to hit the Mogu after it performs one of its strikes. Defeating the first guy will then leave you with the Mire Terror to deal with on its own, which is a lot harder to kill, having more punishing attacks and a lot more durability. You can chain together a lot of fast lunges and slams, following up with strikes that can be quite hard to predict. Not great, considering a fair few of these will be unblockable too. Keep darting out of the way of these, strafing around anything that gets thrown at you, and play defensively to avoid getting caught out. Even using your own slow ability to break the Mire Terror's flow, and dish out a nice chunk of damage to help whittle down that health bar. If you go back to Coruscant and open up a secret door, the Frenzied Jotaz is going to come charging at you from behind it. You might recognise this weird looking creature if you played the first game, with their species typically living on the planet Zepho. They're pretty bulky things with tough skin and long arms which generally plod around trying to slap you all over the place using brute strength and raw power. With that said, they do have clumsy characteristics, being all brawn and no brains, throwing heavy punches and swinging their arms around to try and hit you, though having attacks that can be read and dodged fairly easily, or at least easier than some of the other legendary creatures anyway. Those moves are quite slow and many have long wind-up times, making them more predictable. But the Frenzied Jotaz still shouldn't be underestimated despite this, with a lot of its jabs, swings and kicks having quite a lot of reach, which can still be problematic if you get caught off guard. Also not helped out by the fact that you have to fight this guy in a fairly small space. It's generally best to attack and retreat, jumping in while the Jotaz staggers around after an attack, and then landing a few melee hits up close before diving out of the way again. Keep throwing in a few ranged attacks in between, and you should be able to finish this guy off without too much of a fuss. So probably the most notorious enemy type from the last game has somehow managed to sneak its way into Jedi Survivor for a cameo appearance. Of course, it's an Oggdo. Not just any Oggdo, but the spawn of the frog men is called Oggdo, the much deadlier subspecies that terrorizes back on the planet of Bogano in Jedi Fallen Order. This pushover can be found on Kobo, in a den within the Bedler Raider Fort, and if you thought the original was pretty savage, well, its descendant is an even bigger pain in the arse, having more strength and aggression, probably being the hardest enemy to defeat in the whole game, due to how cutthroat its attacks be and due to it being able to kill instantly, by latching onto you with its tongue and drawing you in for a lethal chomp. Something that's no doubt broken a few controllers and possibly a few TVs. A lot of this guy's attacks are unblockable, automatically making this a more punishing fight than usual, and many of said attacks can hit you quickly over distance, with Oggdo lunging forwards with devastating bites, slams and belly flops. You can jump across the arena to cover ground fast, and generally due to the unrelenting nature of those attacks, trying to counter and parry its moves can be risky business up close, especially with it often following those strikes up with unblockable ones, which aren't always easy to predict. Oggdo gets more aggressive as the fight rages on, throwing more attacks and combos into the mix, also spewing acid all over the floor to make the place more hazardous too. Its attacks might be limited, but they're awkward to outmaneuver or counter, so prepare to take a lot of damage and prepare to get your butt kicked if you're not ready for the challenge. It's definitely a brutal fight, but so long as you can get your timings right, try your best to dodge that bloody tongue attack, and you're quick to heal with stims after taking a few hits, the spawn of Oggdo can be beaten. Just don't be too surprised if you end up becoming frog food a few times along the way. Good luck. So those are all the creature enemy types you can expect to battle in Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Be sure to check out my other guides on Galactic Empire, Bedlam Raiders and Haxian Brood enemies on my channel, and give me a like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video and want to see more. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll be seeing you in our next one.